Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Truth Table, episode 64. I am grateful to have three guests. One has not arrived yet, but three men who served our country, honoring their oaths, and all here to share their experiences, insights, and possible remedies to ensure the integrity of our Constitution. It's the men like the brave men on tonight's show that could save our country and end the selfish, destructive ideologies of the woke DEI activists in positions of power and the abuse of the chain of command in our military and police have allowed corruption to fester. My first guest tonight, I'd like to welcome, is from the Canadian Armed Forces. Also, I consider him my brother and a multiple guest here on the Truth Table. Please welcome Selgovae Pecht.
Hello.
Welcome back, brother.
Hi.
And we always get into great conversations together, and I look forward to tonight. I don't expect things to change much between you and I in our conversations, but it's all about enlightening and maybe sharing things that people may not even know. I know you've taught me already many things, and I appreciate that, and I value your time on the shows. Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much, Paul. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we were talking about the flag and the coronation.
Yeah.
Let's dig into that.
Well, the flag in particular is an important issue that should resonate with everybody. And apparently it is right now with matters that have everybody's attention around our national identity. And on previous shows, I've spoken to you about a policy that the Liberal government drafted in 2016 called the Policy on Communications and Federal Identity. And in that, the Treasury Board directed all offices that report to Parliament to remove the flag symbol from all correspondence. So going forward into 2018, the Liberal Justice Minister repealed Criminal Code 296.1, which is the blasphemy libel. And it was indictable, and it carried 2 years, ironically, to even suggest repealing it was an offense to it. And that was what brought binding obligation to all oaths that contained, so help me God, to a constitution under God of the King James Version Bible. That constitution represented by the Canadian flag, by Queen's Proclamation, an emblem that represents the ideals and identity of Canada, which is under the Crown's oath, which is under God. Now, when you take that from the courtroom, it's a representation that had a position of honor that framed the judge and obligated them to recognize any mustering of a capacity that you have to your inherent rights before them. But they took that binding obligation out, and instead, by order of the Treasury Board, left only the shield. And the shield represents the corporation and the equity of the nation. Equity has two meanings. One is around fair taxation, and the other one is about fair treatment. And without that element of the emblem of the nation that represents our Constitution, that brings relevance to a dimension of that interpretation, when you take that out, you're left to the will of the state. And if you're left to the will of the state to recognize inherent individual rights, they don't exist because they can't exist at the discretion of another.
Perfect.
Even if you're ignorant of them in the moment, everybody that takes an oath to protect your constitutional rights and representation is bound with their life to defend those rights. And they haven't. And the reason why they've been getting away with it legally is because that forum that is judging everything is letting them get away with it. And by order of the Treasury Board, therefore there's no separation of government. The judge is not acting without any fear of a consequence. Because in that same policy of Identity and Communications of Canada, Federal Policy on Communications and Identity, Section 7 of that speaks to the consequences that not only happen to the institution that houses the agent that breaches it, but the individual themselves. So our one guest, who had Vincent, as he spoke on testimony in the NCI about the Constitution recognition being completely ignored, and that tyranny is in fact by definition in place. He's right, and this is how it's happening in that theater of representation, where only entities and title exist.
Well, speaking of Vincent, he is here. Thank you, for Vincent. You're also doing a 10-part series breaking down law enforcement, police association, regulatory agencies, and public prosecutions. So that's a 10-part series that you're developing right now?
That's correct.
Yeah, well, thank you for coming on to the Truth Table. Vincent's a 32-year veteran for the Ontario Provincial Police Force as a forensic investigator, and you testified multiple times at the National Citizens Inquiry, and I've watched both of them. And so I want to thank you for your service. And thank you for everything that you're doing to try to help this country so far. You know, I featured you in one of my podcasts. I think it was 32, and YouTube went ballistic, went absolutely nuts over it, and gave me a strike and everything. But are you testifying at the next National Citizens Inquiry? Is there not one coming up soon?
No, it has just finished in Edmonton, and I believe that will be the last location where the NCI would be hosting. I believe it's all wrapped up now.
So tell me about how you see the Nazification of Canadians since COVID.
Well, that's a very interesting term to use. A lot of people use other terms like socialism, like communism. I think my preferred term is corporate fascism. It's a little bit of everything that we've seen. Certainly tied to global dominance and globalism. And you would sound like a crackpot, and I would sound like a crackpot, and we all sound like a bunch of crackpots until you actually read. And I think most people don't read. But once you start reading, and once you start understanding the true nature of all that has already been stated on a global scale, there's no question that corporations working very closely together with government agents looking for aggressive global change in how we as humans live on this planet, and how this war, I would call it that, how this war against humanity is playing out against the Western world right now. And it's never been more obvious. It's never been more relevant. And I think for a long time, we've seen this coming. And we, even myself, I have to say, have been in denial for quite a while on quite a few issues until they're at your doorstep. And then the next issue, and then the next issue. So I believed that at some point in 2021, we were on the precipice of becoming a police state. And then having been at the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa in February of 22, I saw how we did become a police state. And any ambiguity was erased. There's no question. It was very disappointing then to see the Canada that I knew then had died a death, a very unfortunate death, when the realization is that our rights and freedoms no longer exist. And I'm not sure if they ever did, but I would say that in my capacity as a law enforcement officer, they were certainly upheld for my tenure of 32 years. And I don't think we've had any problems with that. Not to the level of what we saw starting in 2020. And so, when they were deemed as a result of the notwithstanding clause that your rights would be limited, and then became privilege instead of right, there's no question that we went into a two-tier system then. And when you understand that your rights become privileges temporarily, you could no longer call them rights. You realize that we just have privileges and they can be turned on and off. And the sad part is that when we see what's happening in policing, the level of which not only enforcement action has been taken, but the lack of investigative action to be taken where necessary, then you realize the police state is acting as the Praetorian Guard. The government is very tied so closely to politics that it is no longer representing the best interests of the public, but rather an elite group of individuals that are not only running the show, but that are stealing taxpayers' money, doling out funds to their friends and family, and nobody's being held accountable and no investigations are being launched. You just need to look historically at reference to any regime in the Western world since the founding of the Western world to see that as governments change, as regimes change, no new regime looks back at the previous regime to say, this is what they did, this is who needs to be held accountable, these issues need to be investigated, these people need to be brought to court, and the courts need to judge based on the evidence. We never see that, and I suspect we won't. So here we are.
Yeah. So what can Canadians do if we have a treasonous government?
Well, first of all, most Canadians don't realize we have a treasonous government. When most Canadians are lied to by the media and told this is good and that's bad, most Canadians just do as they're told and listen and believe that what they are told is accurate. I think maybe 10%, and this is strictly a hypothetical guess, 10% of Canadians maybe understand the true nature of the degradation of our Constitution, of the degradation of our society, and they go along with it. They go along with 100 genders. They go along with the criminal behavior by our politicians or political class. We have no real opposition party. We have no ability to corral in what our government is doing. And I suspect at some point, should Canadians wake up to what's really going on in this country, they may see things in a different light. But right now, Russia is bad. China is bad. Global climate change can be solved if you just put all your money and give all your money to the government. That will solve that issue. Roll up your sleeve. You're going to put experimental products into your body. We're going to tell you they're safe and effective. Anybody who has a contrary opinion will be silenced or censored. This is the nature of the direction of where we're going. And I think, Paul, you understand this. So I don't mean to be preaching to the choir, but anyone in law enforcement who might be looking at this may or may not understand. I can say that there are quite a few people who have reached out to me in law enforcement who definitely understand the scope at what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, we have officials that are intentionally working against our nation's constitution, serving outside interests. So
Correct.
We have no part in all of this. And Selgovae, one of my other guests, was in the Canadian Armed Forces, and he was talking about the flags being removed from courtrooms. Hi, Selgovae. Welcome to the show. Welcome back. So this is a very special show for me because I have three men here. I have Kirk as well, who's waiting in the back patiently. Kirk Riese is a Canadian Ranger, Selgovae, Canadian Army, and then you, of course, the Ontario Provincial Police. But your work didn't stop there. You continued even after you retired. So for that, I'm grateful to have you here. But did you know anything about the flags being removed from the courtrooms, Vincent?
No. Nothing surprises me at this point, though.
But that's a binding thing, isn't it, Selgovae?
So my suggestion, well, where you'll find it in legislation, Vincent, would be the Policy on Communications and Federal Identity, drafted in 2016, modified and put into effect in August 2019, right before Zooming the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
If the representation isn't present in the body of the court, it removes all binding obligation upon the judge. The Treasury Board, under Section 2.2 of that reference to that policy, the Treasury Board directed only the corporate shield to remain, and that the Canadian flag symbol would be removed from all correspondence between all offices that correspond judicial in nature or quasi-judicial in nature with them. Section 7 of that policy are the consequences if any institution or agent within them were to disregard that. This is also found in the terms and conditions of anybody that's accessing Veterans Affairs benefits right now. So when they say voluntary participation, they're referring to a consent to remove any binding obligation to our oaths. In 2018, the Justice Minister repealed Section 296.1 of the Criminal Code, Bass be liable, indictable for 2 years because of all oaths of office or so help me God to a constitution under God of the KJV. So your inherent rights are captured in that emblem. And if it's not present in the body of the court in the pole position of honor, reference the National Flag Act of 2012 and the rules of etiquette of the flag flight, it doesn't have any binding obligation upon the judge. In 2 courts in Ontario, Simcoe and Port Colborne, they are crossing the flags. This is a demonstration of the intention to remove the binding obligation because they left it present where it hangs in the correct position. However, where it's anchored to the ground is where they remove, and so it's an illusion presented, and that demonstrates intention. And I've been speaking to this directly, but it gets deeper because in 2015, they got us to search at the entry of a courthouse. We gave up our presumption of innocence by consent voluntarily when we do that. The rights that are retained for the person thereafter, and the person, as you will be aware, is an entity. And it doesn't have the same capacity of rights as a ver or man. And our words are used against us. So
Yeah, I agree.
Identity defines capacity in the theater to which we speak and in the theater of representation if we consent to the representation not being present. And so for a person that's in the position of accused, as I am in the position that I am, that's quite terrifying. And we could do a show on that on itself because the judge is actually, his son is in the line of fire of a investigation that I launched against a nuclear power plant. That's in a 6-year investigation. I digress. When the accused makes an invocation of this to bring relevance to it inside the body of the court, it is looked at as if they're vexing the court. And through a lens, it could be seen as that because nobody on the observer side cares. The public is not in the body of the court questioning the theater to which we're judging our peers in. When an individual stands before the body, he's speaking against the body, and unless something from within the body or a part of the body speaks on their behalf, there will be no recognition of what they're speaking to. So when Paul speaks to the what should we do, I've been saying the most peaceful thing that anybody across this country can do is to walk into your local courthouse. You don't need a herd. It's an individual care. To our participation, to our Constitution, and recognize that the emblems that bring all recognition in that theater of representation to our inherent rights. And even if I can't speak to it, the judge is aware that I didn't shape my tongue, the system did.
Mm-hmm.
So any mustering that I make to it, there's an intervention under the word everyone as one word that he has to make. If someone's choking, there's an implied consent that they want to live. And therefore there's an implied obligation upon the judge under the Crown's oath, under the Crown's oath to which they work under. And the international covenants, if nothing else. No servitude.
You know, you have so much legal knowledge that you could probably be a lawyer. I mean, you could quote sections of law. I mean, that's amazing to me.
I've never been in a position in my life where I felt that I had to speak in such ways.
I know.
Because inherent rights should not cost somebody a great fortune of their personal life spent that's invested in order to have recognition brought to them. And we are in a time as COVID is just a glaring example of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
the very word corona? If you put a TION, if you put the suffix on the end of it, and if you look at the oath that the Crown took under God, what's supposed to happen at a coronation? Nobody knows. Well, very, very few. And they're not following their oath. They've breached it to everybody. And so the challenge to everybody is first to not react in a way that they want to, because they have a whole box of big sticks they can unload on you. So the only way that I suggest that we can do it correctly, gracefully, intelligently, and enlightened, and I mean that word enlightened in the deepest, most rooted way, is to lawfully care and walk in the observer side. And the second the record opens, just one individual stand up, a trickle, one in the morning, one in the afternoon in every courthouse. And if we started doing that tomorrow, I can promise you by the end of the week, if some recognition isn't brought to it, there's going to be some virus that prevents us from going to court again.
Yeah, you could be right. Vincent, you want to add anything?
Well, there are a lot of dynamic pieces that are moving on this chessboard very quickly. And as time has gone by, we can see that the amount of movement is accelerating very quickly. When we went through our COVID years, some of us were aware that this problem's not going to go away. It's going to accelerate. And that thought and that belief has come true. That has been proven, that the actions of our government that have taken place were not specific to a reported virus that was going through around the world or our community. These elements of controls have expanded well beyond a pandemic into other issues to bring across or bring about this globalist agenda. So we're not denying that, but as one of my good friendly colleagues that had died in the line of duty that I work with used to use a term that I like to use once in a while, and he would say, you know, we don't worry about the monkeys throwing coconuts when the elephants are stampeding. And that clearly applies to this issue as well. We need to not really get hung up in the minutia, although sometimes the minutia can be like breadcrumbs, showing us the path of steps that are being taken, no doubt, and confirming our beliefs. But we have some really big issues that we're dealing with. I don't profess to have the answers, and I make it very clear that when I speak to people, I'll probably be asking more questions than providing answers. But we really need to look closely at where this is going. We already understand the mechanisms behind what's causing this, and we can see the path of where it's going. We're stuck in this triangle between media that is a complete propaganda machine, a government that is already captured, police services, and civil service that it's already captured, and just working simply for the state, not for the Constitution or the rights of any individual in this country. And what options do you have? What realistic options do you have? And some people might say, well, this is a possibility. And I try to dismiss a lot of the possibilities if it's not a realistic possibility. There's a lot of pie in the sky thinking. But realistically, we do have options available. Some people don't like them. Some people like the idea of the 51st state. Some people don't. Some people believe that our Constitution can be fixed. We need a little bit of tweaking. And I believed up until February of 2022 that our Constitution just needed a little bit of tweaking.
Me too.
I realized quickly after that it is such a broken system, and the requirements that would be necessary to fix that system are not a realistic possibility. Not at all in this political theater, not at all in this state of war that we are in with globalists trying to invoke extreme change. And that change, a big component of that change, is ensuring that the public knows that your rights have been taken away and the government completely controls all facets of your life. And the public isn't aware because we have a media that's complying as well.
Yeah, and media makes it fascism, and along with the pharmaceutical industry and newspapers. While you were serving as an OPP officer, did you notice any issues with the chain of command or abuses within your department?
Yeah, I did.
So
I did. And I think my explanation to that, you ask yourself, how did I get here from that? If you saw problems in the chain of command, how did I navigate that? How is it I navigated that and other people didn't? And I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for other members, but I can say that I knew very quickly on when I started in the police service, I saw very quickly, and I'm talking about my first month on the job, I saw what it was going to take to go through the promotional process. I could see the individuals that were very hungry to go through that process. And I was disgusted by it. And I just said, I guess I'm not going through the promotional process. Not if it has to happen the way I see it happening. And I'm just not interested in that. So as time went on in my career, occasionally you would be given an order to do something that you knew was completely wrong. It was immoral. It was unethical. It was quite dirty. And you might have been given an order by a senior commander to do something. And I had no problem saying no. It's just like, nope, not going to do it, because it was wrong. And I just didn't have a problem saying no. Now, if I was interested in the promotional process or the potential for the promotional process, or I wanted something specific, a specific course or a specific direction I wanted to take, then that would be a different story, because as soon as you say no, you're going to be labeled and you're not going to get that thing that you want. You're not going to get that promotion. So be it. I mean, I wasn't hungry for it. And I just wanted to do my job as efficiently, effectively, and morally, so that I can go home at night and I can sleep. And so,
I think we're the same.
I hope that answers your question to that.
No, it does. It does. I think all of us are the same here. Same question as Selgovae and the Canadian Armed Forces. Did you find any issues with the chain of command? And I guess you could almost say the same thing that Vincent said, but within the Canadian Armed Forces, it's kind of the same, isn't it, when it comes to promotion?
Yeah, but it all works in a very controlled framework. The major difference between policing and soldiering is that soldiers work under a different liability clause. And so the application of a discretion that the police enjoy, a soldier doesn't have the same capacity to employ that. So I'm a proud member of a council of corporals, and I never really sought ambition, just cool jobs within. And I guess reflecting on one of the sort of the response to the flag issue would be, in particular to the word minutia. I mean, I've spoken to a number of police officers. I worked in the capacity as a composite adversary, so I interacted with the emergency response team and the tactical response unit on a regular basis as an adversary for them. And if you don't know your oath, you have no framework in which to measure the words that I employ. It's just that simple. If you go into me in a matter that's summary and I ask you in a moment to demonstrate your oath and you can't say it or open up your notebook and read it, then you have demonstrated incompetence and ignorance in my presence, and you can't step on my rights. And the minutia of the flag and the emblem of our nation, and that's what it was called when it was raised by Lester B. Pearson, first time ever. And its relevance, because it captures both the bill and the charter, but the Constitution's a body of parts and they work in a meshwork. One part can't reduce another part's value. So going on the fact of that, what I've just said about the oath, and when I walk into a court and there's robes and there's a very specific place I'm supposed to be and sit, and all of this has theater representational value. The very words that we communicate in that express our will, they are not made by us as individuals. We are using tools that belong to something else. And we need to recognize that because, you know, to every cow it's calf, to every book it's copy.
Yeah.
So
same question to you, Kirk, after... Go ahead, Selgovae.
No, I was just going to say about the title dimensions and recognizing the supremacy of God and rule of law, job 32:21, let no flattering title be put upon man's person. That's not the person of men. So when you walk into a court, I suggest if anybody does find themselves, establish your capacity pretty quickly in the jurisdiction, ask what they're using as a reference to your words. And if they happen to say Merriam-Webster, you tell them that it's under man, section 6, or mankind.
Right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Selgovae. Now, Kirk, did you notice any issues with the chain of command in Rangers?
I'm not sure. Vincent, are you aware of my situation at all?
Yeah, to some degree. I know you got a long story there.
Yeah, no, for sure there is. Maybe check your DMs when you get a minute. But yeah, you said earlier morally, and you said no to taking what I think you were referring to as improper commands or perhaps illegal commands. Is that kind of what I gather? Or yeah. See, and that's the issues we're at now. Is somebody else probably took that order and they probably got promoted, and you got stepped over. Meanwhile, you were meaning to do the right thing, but and that's why we're at this spot today where we can't find people to do the right thing anymore. The task was done, but we're supposed to have safety measures for in case a situation where there is a bad order, you can report it. And
yes.
In my case, that's what I did. Unfortunately, I go way up to Trudeau. So there is no help for people that go up that high. It's for the smaller things, break and enters and stuff like that. But national security is a way different ball game. And unfortunately, we can't find any. Like me personally, for 6 years, I've been trying to find anybody that'll, as you said, you said no, but I'm trying to find someone that will say yes to the right thing, to do the right.
Yeah.
And all I'm asking is just take my documentation, because that's all I was asked, and that's all I swore to, right?
Yeah.
And
you
know
are
where to draw the line, or else we don't have a constitution, because we can't have a constitution if it's not enforced. I think, I always thought the Constitution was great, but then I started seeing cracks in it, and then I really saw the cracks when I reported the wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So if there was a Bill C-290, whistleblower protection, that's in the Senate, passed and enforced, like my friend Luke Sabron says, he's been in the House of Commons. They all know his story. They all know mine, and no one's doing anything about it. So we just got to find the right politicians and enforcement of some sort that's willing to. Unfortunately, when you step out of bounds, you risk your pension, your life sometimes, and your sanity a lot of the times. But
yeah, Vincent, what would you suggest? Like someone like in the Rangers, unable to, get past the chain of command to find remedy for, he reported wrongdoing and all sorts of shenanigans going on there in the Rangers.
Well, I think just from my limited knowledge of what I understand about Kirk's case, and I have read a bunch of the information that he's posted, and I'm just not really fully familiar with it now because there's just so much data being dumped out there constantly. But I do recall, and what I would say is that Kirk's a bit of a different individual, where a lot of individuals like Kirk have an issue that they're trying to resolve that is very specific to them, that is very specific to something egregious that happened that they've experienced, that they're looking for, and their whole life seems to be focused on resolving this issue, like getting justice, getting this truth to light to get this issue dealt with. And nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to address it. Nobody wants to get back to you. Maybe nobody wants to seem to help. But it's because there are so many issues on the table. And I certainly don't mean to offend anybody when I use the word minutia, but when we have so many big issues in play constantly, a lot of issues, and I have my own. I mean, I have issues that I'm involved in now with the courts, and suing the prime minister. But it's really more relative to me and a group of 20 or 30 people. It doesn't affect the rest of the people in your community. It doesn't affect the rest of the people in your province or across your country. They just go about their day and they don't see how, because they're not the victims, and they don't see or haven't felt the pain associated with this injustice. And so to Kirk, it's really a big deal. To other people, it's not to say it's not important, but to other people, we're just sort of balancing all of the issues in play. And I really don't have an answer specific for Kirk, because the problem he's facing is a similar problem that a lot of people are facing.
Yeah.
And somebody hit the nail on the head when I think it was Kirk, when he talked about whistleblower protection. That's absolutely critical. And it's a piece in the chessboard that no longer exists, and it really needs to be there.
Do you want to eat that?
I agree.
Before I
agree.
forget, yeah, sorry, it slipped my mind, but
That's
ahead.
okay.
I was going to say that actually one of the common things is the same forum that we're all seeking justice in commonly across the nation. And the same forum that said everything that we were suffered through was okay, was held without a representation of our Constitution present when the decisions were made. It wasn't. And I'm a little bit baffled how some of the characters in the convoy so-called leadership just sat through trials where they're talking about sentences that exceed 5 years, and not one of them put faith in the public and asked for a jury trial, or said a word about the flag missing in their courtroom.
Well, the problem with that,
Well,
Selgovae,
they have it on a guitar. Well, they have it on a guitar on a book cover, screaming, "Hold the line," and being completely financed by a GoFundMe that nobody else can access.
yeah, just to answer that question is, it's not your choice to choose a jury trial if the Crown elects to proceed by way of summary conviction. The Crown has to choose to proceed by way of indictment on a charge, unless it's a straight indictable offense, which mischief isn't, in order to have a jury trial. So,
Well, would it not be any sense sentence that exceeds 5 years or more, that's 5 years or more, it is a right of those charged to ask for a jury trial. Any sentence. So, and that's part of the freedom that we have, is the capacities to which we're speaking that we are a president, where we want to be, our actions to be judged by our peers or by a judge.
Well, I will have to say, I mean, being judged by our peers that are all brainwashed, it makes it kind of makes it a scary situation when they can be manipulated to.
Can I add to that before I forget again?
Sure.
And I'm not sure if I know Vincent wouldn't know, but my purpose was to help the people in northern Saskatchewan and Laurent, Saskatchewan, because they have such a massive drug problem and corruption problem there. And that was my whole point, was trying to bring it to light, but it's been impossible. And unfortunately, in these last 2 months, there's been over 30 deaths from overdoses, suicides, and that's astronomical for a place of only 6,000, 7,000 people. So, and it's gotten worse. But it's to bring light. The corruption is all adding to the deaths and murders, the suicides, but no one wants to bring it to light. And instead, they tend to try to discredit me when I have, the evidence. So, everyone they think they have an idea of what we're fighting for, but it was actually to stop, but it's already happened. So, and still no one wants to talk about it, because that would bring Mr. Trudeau and Chief Tammy Cook-Searson into the limelight and expose all of the corruption. But we'll leave it at that. So,
well, that's what I don't understand about your case, Kirk, because you're getting on podcasts, you're getting exposure. Vincent has heard about you, and still somehow it's not being dealt with. It's not being remedied.
It's career ending. You got to find somebody way up there. Do
you think that's
like the reprisal is real? If you report wrongdoing, which I was supposed to do, unfortunately I was the only one. But if a bunch of people stood up, we would find remedies. But it's just a matter of getting that to happen.
Do you think that's why this isn't being dealt with, Vincent? Career ending. Is Kirk's story a career ender? Is that why you think it's not being dealt with? Because he did go through the right channels to make complaints.
I'm really not in a position to answer that question as to why. The pathway that I'm taking personally, or the pathway that I understand a number of other individuals have raised the alarm, sounded the horn, raised the alarm, and have supplied law enforcement agencies and government agencies and health agencies with very important information that's very relative to everybody having to get a needle jabbed in their arms and the consequences associated to that. And there's dead silence from everybody on that. Like if you look at the NCI as an example, and I think that's an excellent example, the National Citizens Inquiry, all the politicians in the various provinces associated, or the cities, the chiefs, the health officers, anyone of relevance, and it's hundreds, if not thousands of people, were notified and were summoned to attend, given the opportunity to attend. And none of them showed up, not one, because it's an issue they don't want to talk about. It's talking about something where they may put their foot in their mouth, and they've all got someone who supersedes their authority who's going to come down very heavy on them if they say the wrong thing, the thing that goes against the narrative. So every single one of them just avoids answering the summons, avoids coming, avoids talking about it, avoids discussing it. And if you understand what just came out recently in the Alberta report, one of the highlights of the Alberta report that was just released, I think within the last 2-3 weeks, that outlines all of the COVID measure problems. It'll say right in the report, if you read closely, the reason the report seems very damning, and there's a lot of damning information, there's nothing good about it, is because all of the individuals in the province of Alberta who were associated to and responsible for all of the mandates and the measures that took place, all of them were given an opportunity to comment, and they all turned it down. Nobody wanted to talk. So, when Kurt's having a problem, that he's like, nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to talk to anybody about anything.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's like everything's a hot potato when it comes to the
Right.
government.
Right.
So this Police for
just-
Freedom, are you still involved? You're
Yes.
involved with this. And is this where the 10-part series is going to be posted on this site, or is it that
No.
separate?
No. So Police for Freedom was started in Spain, and there are many members of police services affiliated to that from different parts of the world. It was started up at the beginning of 2021 when countries were going into lockdowns. People were protesting the COVID measures, and we were starting to see governments violating people's rights. And during protests, there was a lot of conflict between protesters and the police. So really, Police for Freedom was started initially as one of its components was to be somebody who can speak on behalf of the public about lawful issues when rights are being violated. And the other was to liaise with police on the scene of protests to ensure that they were behaving in an ethical manner, which things just got worse and worse over time. So that was that purpose. But I came to a decision about a month ago that it would be a really good idea to host a podcast series in Canada dealing with our judicial system, dealing with our policing system, to actually bring to light in a bigger way and expose by having these deep conversations with myself, with Donald Best as my co-host, and bringing aboard other former police officers. And on occasion, there may be a active duty police member incognito who wants to speak out about issues that we are facing, where we need to have those conversations. If you ever listen to somebody else who's very friendly tied to active duty policing, they'll just give you a very sterilized version of things that sound like infomercials. I mean, it's just so sterilized that you're not going to get the truth out of what's really going on in policing. So we're not afraid to talk about the truth. We know where the boundaries are of what we can't say, and we don't breach that. But I'm certainly game to talk about a lot of the nasty stuff that goes on in the organizations that I've seen that has nothing to do with operational procedure or anything specific. But we can talk about the dirt, the real dirt that goes on there that needs to change.
So it's on X here. I have found this starting at March 20th this month, Deprived Justice 10-part series. I think Donald Best is a great choice.
Yep. You can play that intro if you want.
Yeah, perfect.
And I hope that whatever happens, that Canadians are allowed to know the truth.
It's incredible just how big of a lie this really is.
And you can find that on the Gircys.
Yeah, so I'll be posting. It's actually on my Twitter feed. I've posted a link to a Rumble channel, and I'll just be posting it again over the next few days, where people can find the Rumble link, and it'll be on my Twitter link as well when we go live. It's every Wednesday now at 8 p.m. Eastern time.
Perfect. I will find it and add it to the comments on this podcast so people can find
Great.
it.
Yeah. We've already done one show last Wednesday, and it went very well. And we'll be continuing on. We say a 10-part series because we know that we can fill 10 slots. But if we gain enough traction on this show and there's a demand, we will just continue on. We'll just keep it going.
That's how I started. I figured I was only going to do about 10 shows, and then I met Kirk, and I said, well, there's 10 shows right there.
Yeah. But, I seriously believe in having a balanced life. In order to get through these problems that we're having, balance is critical, that we maintain balance. And if you start to immerse yourself in some projects and you become off balance, that's not healthy and that's not good. And you're going to burn out at some point.
No, 100%. We have to keep our chin up and try to think positive. We have to, the spiritually strong. We have to, they know to forgive their enemies and love their enemy. And that's a good challenge. And if anyone has problems doing that, you just practice in the mirror. Because that's
you brought up an interesting point. You said spiritually. When Selgovae was talking about the flag issue, that immediately brought me back in mind to go back further to the early to mid 90s. I'd say, right around the mid 90s. And we experienced, I can say for sure in Ontario in the provincial government, and I know it was going across all governments, this broad spectrum of what was called secularism. And it was a division of church and state, right? So and it's interesting because where the Constitution says that Canada is founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law, we started to see God ripped out of civil service in the mid 90s. No Christmas trees, actually Christmas trees were okay. No nativity scenes, no crosses, no reference to anything biblical within the public service. And Quebec did that as well. And then, of course, some might say, well, we see advantage to that because of the various religions that we now see immersing in Canada. But, Canada was founded, the Western world was founded on Christian principles. And there's nothing wrong with Christian principles. Christian principles are amazing. And our love for God has to be our priority. And how did that get ripped out of our government, of our civil service? And it's not just flags. It goes beyond flags. But what was said earlier about knowing your oath, that is absolutely critical. And I suggest to people that if you're ever confronted with law enforcement who wants to start questioning you on something, that's probably the paramount question to ask. I'm going to tell you right up front, if you cannot recite your oath to me right now, then I am not talking to you. That's flat out, and really you shouldn't be doing your job. If you don't recall your oath every minute of your working day, you shouldn't be doing your job.
Well, that's what makes this show special, because all three of you took oaths and you all kept your oaths, and and in the end, you were, ridiculed and character assassinated, and just for trying to do the right thing, which I find really scary, really, because all three of you represent, our protection of Canadians against these sort of things of enemies from within. And you all witnessed enemies from within, and you saw it from the inside of power, what is going on.
Yeah,
that's the huge value of having all you speak here.
I'm wondering. Sorry,
the reference there is thank you. And the beginning and the timeline you talk about in the early 90s in the United States, they had already begun through psychology a program of removing our identity to Christianity, and it got repealed in Trump's first term, and they started to return. But we kept running in our channel, And I was serving in the time that you referred to. In that time, I could speak to it. And I know in all honesty, in the military side, there was a requirement to actually reel in some of the conduct that was being embraced in ways, for sure. So it came in under that, but in the intention of removing a spiritual connection, which speaks to that supremacy. So yeah, I agree with that. And again, our words define our capacity, and Section 11F of the Charter is where that limitation on rights to jury selection or not is where you'll find that too. Just to go back to that point, having our recognition awareness to that capacity is something that is the corporate constitution that you refer to, that parallels the logic and the legislation and just the acts from 2015 to now that were done in legislation all speak to. So when I speak to people in the flag issue as one that needs to be addressed first, is because of some things that we've spoken about, which would be a common thing that resonates with everybody in that forum and their rights or freedoms. And in a minefield, using a minefield analogy, we found ourselves deep in a minefield right now. And to run forward uninformed, at the very least, unaware and uninformed as public, where we're going is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So then the safest thing to do is to take steps back in the same way that we did into where we are right now, till we get to a position of familiarity and returning that standing of obligation, binding obligation through representation in the theater of representation as legislated, again, in the National Flag Act and all the rules and representational value in that theater. Put the bar back in the courtroom as well. Get that gate swinging again, because they've flooded the courtroom. And when you do Zoom, everybody's just open to jurisdiction into wherever you're sitting. If you're in your house, you've consented to an open warrant on you wherever you are. They can enter. And then everything in plain sight is stacked on top of you. And it's all by a tacit consent that you never knew you made, but you did it, and ignorance is no excuse. And Vincent, this tyranny that everybody recognizes, I feel frustrated, because when you listen to Kirk's story, and in an example, he's told a story about how he had to get flown somewhere, and so he didn't want to take a medication to render him unconscious. So they said, fine, let's negotiate. You want to put on a straitjacket? Yeah, sure. And they did it to him anyway. And he glazes over that offense to his rights while trying to speak to the criminality as the bigger issue.
Yeah.
There's abuse no greater sacrifice to a greater collective concern than someone that disregards an abridgment like that was done to them in the process while speaking to a criminality that affects us all. And Kirk, I suggest to you that why your issue has been handled the way it is because a forethought thought about Northern sovereignty and investments therein were already, the machine had its inertia and it was rolling, dude. And anything that you brought out that brought question to how that money and ammo cans flowed was going to bring question into it at this time right now, which they did not want to deal with. And your rights were considered meh. And Section 15 didn't mean a pinch of coon shit, because there's nothing to bind the person that says, hey, wait a minute, in that court. And no officer that you spoke to would recite or affirm that he knew his oath, even if you asked him. And that's what gets them around it. And that repeal of Section 296.1 is what put him in a position of plausible acceptability to do it. And we consent all the time.
I'm not sure if you've heard, here in Bella Bella, the Celtic Nation is suing the RCMP for failing to do their job of, well, they gave a whole bunch of examples, but one of them is keeping the drugs out of town. So, L'Orange is the murder capital of Canada. There's 4 of my son's babysitters were murdered or unalive, they call it. And the deaths up there are happening so rapid, like in the last 2 months. But they still won't sound the alarm, because then it makes the corruption very obvious. That's stuff I've been screaming about for 6 years. But like I said, here in Bella Bella, they're suing the RCMP, which is, where would they get that idea? But either way, things might be rolling. I think we can speed things up by waking people up and sharing the stories. I don't ask for much. I just said, hey, please look at the story of Kirk Riese or Luke Sabron or David Drover, Sue Spruill. There's a bunch of whistleblowers that have no rights in Canada. We paid our taxes. I've worked hard. Most of these people have worked hard all their lives, and they get no services, no protection, nothing. So yeah, we're in dire straits here. I agree with that much, but and I'm just trying to wake people up by just telling the simple truth. But why are so many people simply pressing block or trying to discredit the truth? Like, it's painfully obvious. No one's ever asked any questions, but I'll leave it at that.
It is painfully. I mean, we've seen a lot of things like veterans. Here's Canadian Armed Forces was investigated for speaking out against COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Major Stephen Chadowski is the latest serving member of the Canadian military to have spoken out against government-ordered mandates and restrictions intended to curb the spread and severity of COVID-19. Oh, YouTube's going to kill me now. But I've seen soldiers getting beat up by fellow soldiers for not taking the needle, they considered it like an order, you have to do it.
Well, they're
nurses
forgetting the root.
Lost their jobs.
Yeah. They're forgetting the root cause of all this is people never stood up, and they allowed it to happen. They never, it's the corruption in politics and leadership of all sorts in every field. I've seen, like, I've done whistleblower spaces where people call me from City of Edmonton, for example, bands in Ontario, town halls in Regina, it's everywhere. And that's the problem, is people are scared to stand up.
Well, I think television is a big part of it, by creating apathy in Canadians. They just wanted to be left alone. Okay, I'll do it. Just leave me alone. And I think that's kind of like part of the mind brainwashing technology that was used against Canadians on multiple levels. And I've seen good people being harmed just for not complying, and it's very sad, because I'm a compassionate person and I don't want to see anyone die. And as a spiritual person, I don't want to fund any wars. Like murder is a commandment that I won't violate. I won't kill, someone else. And I certainly don't want to finance it and be complicit that way. So a Christian country would want their government not to not to participate in wars. The only time we would have to war if they're invading our shores. As far as I'm concerned, participating in war is not a friendship thing. Like, they're our allies. We're not going to kill people because we're allies. So I mean, that's my position. I'm anti-kill. Anti-war. And you were all in a position where you could have been killed, or you could have, had to kill to save your own life. So that's where it's different between you three and, majority of Canadians.
Well, that's what I was told. Sorry, Paul, there's a big delay here. That's what I was told from a member of Veterans Affairs. They said, Kirk, no one will be able to comprehend anything you say unless they've served their country. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's painfully obvious. But I thought, no way. But she was absolutely 100% correct. It's very hard to get people to understand.
So, Paul, if I can just shift gears just for a second here.
Absolutely.
I'm not fully sure what the actual main body focus is in this conversation, but I do know that I'm convinced that my concern and Kirk's concern and Selgovae's concern is the same, in the sense that we see an injustice by facets of our government and services, whether it's armed forces, police, and we see the injustices that have been done. We see how they've expanded. We see the direction of the intent, and we're concerned. We're very worried and concerned consistently. That's what the three of us or four of us here have in common, is that what do you think the next step is? Because we don't see this winding down, we see this winding up. And there's no shortage of police personnel from various police services that I'm aware of, and I mean the number is quite high, that have some very serious concerns, that have been aggrieved, that have been mistreated by injustices, in that either they already are in the process of some serious civil suits against the government, or that they will be, or that they're currently facing some type of an issue that is a complete fraud, a complete fabrication to shut them up, whether it's criminal charges or otherwise. And when we started finding each other and we get together and we start comparing stories, this is not a one-off. This is becoming a very common thing, and it's frightening. And so the concern and the issue here is, how much worse is this going to get? Because you know that a cornered animal is going to become very dangerous. And as this starts to play out, it appears that this police state issue of injustice in falsely arresting people, falsely charging people, violating people's rights, and then getting to the point where clearly fabrication is taking place against individuals by law enforcement, by intelligence agencies. I experienced it, and this is a common thing that we're all seeing, and this is our common complaint. I haven't gotten into my story, but I'm not going to discuss my story. I'm not here to talk about my story, but I can definitely understand that the more I hear a repeat of this story from people, the more you realize that this is very common. And how far is this going to go? So your audience, Canadians that are listening to this, need to understand, if they go after people from the Canadian Forces, if they go after current and former police officers who just stood up and spoke out against the government, committed no offense, or people who just wanted to whistleblow on things that they saw that were an injustice, that's how bad it is, and it's going to get worse. So I don't have a solution for this, and I think that's sometimes part of the discussion, is at least to discuss it and say, this is where Canada is now. Yeah. And if we don't have a solution, if we're not going to magically unlock the Constitution and go in there with the repair tool and fix all the sections properly to make it better for us, no, anything that's being done is there to fix and cover up for those individuals that are stealing billions of dollars and getting away with crimes, like a crime syndicate. They're not here for our interest.
Do you think they're able to steal elections with Dominion voting machines?
I know it's a possibility. Yeah, it's a question of, is it going to happen? And I think having the United States as our neighbor to the south, given the current administration, I'm not a fan of anybody in politics, but the current administration has demonstrated for the most part a Christian values-based process and a willingness to fix and resolve these problems, unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. Yeah. So I can only give it a 2 thumbs up and hope that this continues, and hope that they can assist us with this issue however possible.
Well, this tariff retaliatory immature game that Ford is playing and Trudeau, do you think they're trying to implode our country? Like burn it down, as they're on their way out? The Liberals?
No, I think that there's no question in my mind, especially with the Canada First tactic, that our Liberal government has spent Justin Trudeau's 3 terms in this position as a complete destroyer of any form of nationalism, any form of identity, has openly admitted we are a post-national state right from the beginning, has demonized Canadians that wave flags. In Ontario, there was a joint forces project that took place following the Freedom Convoy called Operation Freedom Convoy, where anybody driving a car that's waving flags was a target to get pulled over to collect intelligence information. So that's what they think of your Canadian flag. And all of a sudden, when there is an indication that this powerful guy to the south of us is dropping hints that Canada looks tasty, and I think we're going to want to absorb that. As soon as that happens, there's panic in all the leadership positions to say, how do we put out this fire? Well, we need the help of Canadians to say no. We need Canadians to say, we definitely don't want that. And so let's do a Canada First program. Let's wave Canadian flags now. Complete bullshit. These are the most unpatriotic people I have ever seen in my life, trying 100%. To fool you into some kind of a patriotic program. They just want to save their powerful position, and that's it.
That's exactly why I suggest that this particular time is the most right to challenge them on this, what you state that they're doing, and get them to reinforce and affirm that by putting that back in the courtroom. And what that'll do, and that's my solution offer to everybody, is because what that will do is it'll create one of 2 outcomes. One, they're going to satiate you and put it back in that theater and then behave in accordance with it. Or they're going to allow you to and expect you to wave it everywhere else, but for some reason they just can't bring themselves to put it in there. And on top of all the money, word craft, thought, Privy Council chamber sit-arounds to legislate it in the pattern from 2015 to now in order to do it. That wasn't invested for no reason at all. It was an intention. It has binding emblematic under a proclamation. And you're right, this sudden patriotism around this emblem of our nation, but they can't bring themselves to put it back in the forum to which they judge us from. A theater of representation.
Well, I'll give you another example that's not tied to the Canadian flag, but it's tied to the American flag. So when Donald Trump had made a comment recently about purchasing your citizenship for $5 million, that is very, very telling. It is a very powerful tell. To say that you can purchase your citizenship for $5 million and that's a good deal, okay? You have to understand you're dealing with a deal maker. Donald Trump's like the deal maker, okay?
Yep.
And he wants you to know that the price for citizenship is $5 million. That was done for theatrics to let you know the value of citizenship. Now, if I ask you, Paul, what's the value of U.S. citizenship? You're going to say $5 million, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can actually get a U.S. citizenship for a lot less than $5 million. And there's different forms of visas. You can start a business in the U.S. for a lot less than that. Okay, you can probably get it going for $100,000, $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
But the $5 million claim is important because it tells all Canadians, I don't have $5 million. That's a lot of money. Boy, I wish I had $5 million. I'd love to be an American citizen. I don't have $5 million. That's a lot of money, right?
You do.
Now imagine Imagine one day in the future, it's like, hey, guess what? You guys north of the 49th parallel up there, it's okay. I'm going to give you a deal. You could be a citizen for free. Okay. And so what do Canadians think? That's a $5 million value. Wow. You know,
Yes,
it's a sales pitch, right?
it is. And he
But
says,
what about
get
this though?
monarchy.
Your
Sorry.
birth certificate, your Canadian Ontario birth certificate is a banknote, and it says it right on it. When you look on it, it says it's a certified banknote. So that $5 million, what does that represent out of everything that banknote represents to somebody or something throughout the entirety of your life? So if it's American citizenship is, say, $5 million, but in fact you ended up getting a check at the other end of it for the effort of freeing you up of $10 million. Disclosure is a funny thing in media these days. They're going to tell you truth in one way and eliminate other light, so that the lens that you see it through is going to Pavlovianly like steer you in a direction. And I think we can agree that is part of the marketing that we're under.
I'm not really sure how my birth certificate's a banknote, because it doesn't say it's a banknote on my.
Yeah, if you pull it out of your wallet right now and take a look at it, there's a little circle, and it says registered by the Bank of Canada. And then there's going to be a registration number. It's a banknote. It's a certified banknote, and it says it. This is why whenever you go for employment and they want to know you're bondable.
It doesn't say that on my birth certificate.
On your short form birth certificate, yes, it does. And anybody that's watching, you just, I'll leave it up to you to look at it and take a look at the circle in the center of your short form birth certificate. It's going to be a stamp, a seal, and look around the words around the seal, and it's going to say certified banknote by the Bank of Canada, and it's signed by the Registrar General. Yeah, so that just means that there's so it could be that the dimension to which is being presented. Yeah, right there, that seal's front and center on the bottom. If you can zoom in on it, and that red number.
You can do it, Paul. Paul can do anything. I know he can do it.
Yeah, the Ontario seal. If you can get any closer, and it's going to say a federal banknote, or something to that effect. The word banknote's there.
Certified. Yeah.
Come on, Paul. You can do it. Zoom in there, Paul.
So if you were to not the live birth, that's a different entity. Right. So the live birth is done before registration, and then registration's created. That's your state. That's your person. That's man's person, job 3221. So when a police officer comes up and says, "Excuse me, sir," the only objective is in that moment is to get a consent to being in a capacity that is limited. And your words will be used against you. See, so thank you for affirming that.
Yeah, so I beg to differ with you, but I really got to say, when we get into this common law stuff,
it's not.
I'm talking about common law stuff. People who fail to identify themselves when they're stopped by the police, or fail to follow the judicial process that we have in place that's recognized by the courts, have actually got themselves into a tremendous amount of trouble with the courts. And I can give you an example, and I don't want to mention the name of the individual, but one individual who was charged for attending a church service with a $10,000 fine at the same time that I attended a church service with a $10,000 fine. I offered them some legal help to go through counsel that I was dealing with, and they declined and decided they wanted to represent themselves and follow some of these common law provisions, and not recognizing the justice or the authority of the justice in that case. Ended up with a $15,000 fine that was payable within 30 days.
Absolutely.
And in my case, I was able to get off on that charge.
I'm not debating the dangers of taking
system that the court recognizes.
Right. I'm not arguing the dangers of it is to take a step of faith in there. However, representing oneself in a common law capacity is not correct you can't be in two puddles at the same time. You pick one and you stand in it. So there's no representation in one way. And to the common law having recognition, then the Interpretation of Act of Canada around property rights, section 8.1, will speak to both of those, the civil process and common law having equal authority in Canada, and that's key, around property rights. And your person is your property. So again, your words define your will and your capacity. And when the representation that brings acknowledgement to the inherent capacity and binds the judge in the forum is not present, and after you've given up your presumption of innocence and limited yourself to person walking into the courthouse voluntarily, because acts require voluntary acts and consent. Even if an obligatory force is present, if you fail to muster before it, and so speaking to the trouble people get themselves into by vexing the court, quote unquote, by not correctly attempting and standing in a capacity, you are vexing the court because you're bouncing between identities. And that's
a good example of a birth certificate there.
But that's one side. I'm talking about the other side where the seal is.
So
on this version of it, on the reverse side is where the seal is.
Okay.
And that's a BC one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because every province owns its own cattle, right? Well, because of recognizing the supremacy of God, when you have two souls on your feet, it's the Leviathan sacrifice and atonement ritual. One of those souls is blood out, and the other one's a scapegoat. It's that simple. Yeah. That's what it's touched to. Or you hand your child after creation to the stork, who's Thoth, and he registers in writing, and it all has a relation to an entity. Your Casper the Friendly Ghost, if you play it right. But should you ever do something wrong and try to use that as a sneaky way to get out, you deserve the pain that's visited upon you. I'm not too fond of people that make a mustering in a common law capacity and get stuck in entrapment of representation while trying to do it and not have recognition to the mustering they bring to it. But if you've done something that's a real trespass, fraud, waste, and abuse to the collective, and you try to sneak out of it through those things, and the state does it all the time. Canada's a garden. The fruit that we nourish ourselves off of is a product of how we fertilize it. Those are consents of participation. The word freedom, what does it mean? Define it. It's a moral standard. We're talking about a moral standard. Is it a fundamental of justice that it is wrong to persecute the morally correct? And if that's true, then what is the morality? That Constitution. And it's under something that's under something. And words speak to that. Anyway, thanks.
I'm not going to disagree that natural law shouldn't be followed. It certainly should. And I think we've deviated quite far from that. But we are in a system that is a system that has been created over a long period of time. And it's now creating a lot of problems for us. Paul, I'm not sure how much longer your series is going to go, but we're coming up on an hour and a half, and I will be bailing in a few minutes because I have other obligations. But
that's okay. I appreciate.
Were there any other questions or anything you needed to ask me before I go?
No, I just wanted to hear from each one of you and to talk about your feelings on these issues, and you have done that. So I do appreciate you coming on, Vincent, and I look forward to watching your series, and perhaps you can come on again and we can talk about the series one-on-one. And I wish you well in our state, this country, and I thank you for your advice and your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you too, Vincent. I acknowledge how much, what you've done is huge. So the voice that you've had over COVID was
Yes.
a big step, and I will 100% acknowledge that.
Yep.
It is huge. So I appreciate that you have taken the steps that you have done, and I do see you trying to work in that limit to the maximum, and I acknowledge it and appreciate that effort as well. From my perspective, thank you.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, all for a polite, mature, and respectful conversation. I hate to have to bail, but I look forward to an opportunity for us to engage in conversation at some point in the future as well. Thank you.
Thanks, and
Thank
help who you can when you can. And I got to go too, Paul. And Serge,
All
we'll
right.
talk to you guys later.
Thank you, brothers.
Good night.
Well, it's just me and you. So we must have something that we could finish off with. But
That was interesting.
Very. I agree.
Yeah, I believe how I ended it was probably the most correct way I could speak to it, about people working in their certain, like,
Yeah.
And the legislation that I cite is there. The legislation that I cite is there. Read it, look at it. I really don't feel like I got a good answer to anything that I put forward, and I think that that's telling. So,
but that's the beauty, is now he knows.
Yeah, it's a big note.
And you all have different parts of the government that you work at, different areas, and the fact that you all agree about the promotion thing is everywhere. So that's how they get their loyalty and their the people to do the bad things for them. But I really highly doubt that this is our last show together. I expect multiple shows with all sorts of information. Hopefully that will help everyone listening and the right people listening, because we're really like cornered, and we do need to talk about it, and we are talking about it. And I hope this was helpful for everyone in the audience. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Selgovae, for coming on again. And this March the 9th, 12 days before the golden age of March 21st. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't want to predict anything, but it's supposed to be very positive. The golden age is, a very positive thing that could happen. But I did find the date, and that would give me one more show before then. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do for that. But thank you, Selgovae. Any final words that you want to say on the way out? Or
no, it's just really kind of interesting to have measured some of this stuff against Vincent, and I appreciate Vincent's efforts, as I said before, and everything that I see doing. But I'm again, I cited all legislation, and I stand by everything that I say, and I'm quite comfortable in it too. So,
thank you.
It's not a free man on the land position. It's not.
Yeah.
What I'm speaking to is a recognized, or was, process, and your words are what show the first agent that you speak to that capacity to which you're in. And again, the $5 million thing, it is what I say. You could be worth 20 million, and just that's the price of them doing the business for you on the front end. And here's, you don't know yet. All you know is what they tell you.
Well, I appreciate you. I think of you as my brother, just like Kirk and Vincent. And thank you all at home for joining me on the episode 64 of the Truth Table. I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you and goodbye.